who came up here and did that magnificent welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, Brother Scouts, Sister Guards, I have been, as you can imagine, I have been to many thinking days and founders' days all over the world. But believe me, this one was a total knockout. Yeah, I loved every minute of it. I really did. It was really super. Well done, girls. In a way, it made me feel very humble. Humble the fact that over 100 years ago, yes, 100 years ago, it all started, and that actually went back further than 100 years ago. I'm talking about Brownsea Island. I'm actually going back further than that. As some of you may know, Dutton Seary indicated that my late grandfather was a very famous British soldier who was commanding officer of a little township called Befferking. And during the Boer War that erupted between 1899 and 1902, he commanded that little town. He defended that little town against an enemy of something like 10 to 1. In other words, for every one British soldier, there were 10 enemy. And yet, very underarmed, he had 700, would you believe, he had 700 men under arms, of which 400 had never ever picked up a rifle, would you believe? The rest of them hardly fired a shot anyway. And what was so extraordinary was by sheer bluff and nothing else, by sheer bluff, guts if I may use the word, and typical British determination, he held against an enemy 10 times his own size. What was so unique about it? Well, I'll tell you. What was so unique about it was the fact that the cadets at Befferking, who he formed into a cadet corps, who ran messages from A to B, he formed them up into, I'd say, a scout group. But what is particularly interesting is out of the horrors of war, dreadful atrocities of war, out of this came what is arguably the world's greatest peace movement without doubt. In actual fact, in 1939, September 1939, no, earlier than that, in 1939, BP was actually nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. The only reason he never received the Peace Prize was because war broke out, World War II broke out, and there was no Nobel Peace Prize at all given to anybody that year. In fact, they had to wait until 1947 for the next Peace Prize to occur. Unfortunately, by that time, BP had since passed on. What is the objective of the movement? Well, the objective of the movement, irrespective of what colour, class or creed anyone may belong to, the objective is simply to create a little person's character. To get that young person, irrespective of what level of society they're from, to get that little person to develop their own characters. That's the key, character. And how do we do that? Very simply. The other day I was corrected, and somebody I said about the greatest peace movement in the world, and somebody tried to correct me, quite within their rights. And they said, Michael, what about the Olympics? I said, oh yeah, what about the Olympics? Oh, they're the greatest peace movement. They bring people from all over the world, and they do this and they do that. I said, yes, they bring a lot of nationalism. The only thing that the press and the public are interested in is who is going to win the next gold ribbon for whatever. Who is going to win the most number of gold medals, for that matter. Who ever talks about little Johnny come lately or little Jenny come lately, who comes last? How often do the papers pick up and run with that story? They care little for the effort that little Johnny or little Jenny have made to even make the Olympics, let alone get there. Nothing is ever said about that. And yet the great thing about our great scouting and guiding movement is that we give every young person ample opportunity to find their own levels and to find out exactly what interests them. Ladies and gentlemen, isn't that what we're about at the end of the day? Nobody is better than everybody else. We're all basically at a common level. We're all doing our best to make this world a better world at the end of the day. You see, one of the great things about our guiding and scouting movement is that it speaks all languages. This is the great thing, and this is the reason why scouting and guiding spread across the world so quickly. In 100 years, it's now in something like 220 countries right throughout the world. We can boast a joint membership. Could I go guides in this too, as well, Madam President? But seriously, 240 million young people. Hey, come on, guys and girls, we must be doing something right, mustn't we? And let me refer you, for example, to the 10 main key principles of what our movement stands for. Trusting, loyal, helpful, brotherly, sisterly, courteous, kind, obedient, smiling, thrifty, pure, yes, pure in body and mind. And when a young person, or an elderly person, or a middle-aged person takes up a promise, they don't do it in a cockatoo-type fashion. In other words, they just don't repeat it for the sake of repeating. No, it's more than that. You are placing yourself on your honour. Yes, your honour to do your best. And above all, ladies and gentlemen, above all, to uphold those 10 basic principles of life. This is what the movement is universally accepted for. And I believe in my own heart of hearts, this is the reason why the movement has spread as quickly as it has done in such a short time. I don't want to go on boring you to tears with philosophies and so on, but I'd just like to 100 years ago at Crystal Palace. And my grandfather, with his sister, remember he wasn't married then, Olave hadn't come on the scene yet. She came 5 years later. He's reviewing the troops. I don't know how many troops there were there all together. And then he suddenly came across half a dozen or a dozen young ladies, all dressed up with a sort of scout uniform on. They had, except they were wearing skirts rather than trousers, because women didn't wear trousers in those days. At least I don't think they did. But they had their skirts on, and they had their scout hats, and they had their scarves on, and they had their staves there. And I can just imagine these young ladies approaching grandfather. Here he is, the famous Baden Powell, General Baden Powell, goodness me, but they did. Sybil Kennedy was one of the main leaders, and I knew Sybil. Anyway, they approached him. And I can imagine my grandfather saying to them, "What the devil do you think you are?" Oh, they said, "We want to join our brothers. We want to go camping. We want to go cooking. We want to do this. We want to go that," and so on. So he turned around to his sister, and I can just imagine grandfather saying to his sister, what are you going to do about it? As he did something about it. Urged on by her mother, Henrietta, who, believe me, was a Victorian monster, she really was. To her, the law is the law. You abide by what I say. That was the kind of mentality in those days. Anyway, great-grandmother Henrietta said, "Yes, Agnes, you should do something about this." So she promptly set about writing the first handbook, How Girls Can Build an Empire, or Build the Empire, which was your equivalent of Scouting for Boys. And so she wrote this book. Agnes was the most incredible person, she really was. having 6 brothers, what did she do? She followed exactly what her brothers did. They went camping, sailing. Her younger brother, Major Baden Powell, was one of the early aviators of his time. Now remember, this is all going back to before we had aeroplanes. And Agnes, of course, was put in a balloon, under a balloon, and she even held the height record in those days for staying up longer than anybody else. And with these experiences, for example, she was the only woman for many years to be a member of the Royal Aeronautical Society. A feat unheard of at that time, when you believe that at that time, ladies of that nature in England then, there were certain protocols that they had to abide by. For example, a decent young lady went to a decent school, and then they were usually presented at court, which meant the king and queen of the day and the royal family in England of the day. They had to learn how to walk properly, they had to learn how to curtsy properly, they had to do all these sort of things. They had to learn to sew, knit, darn, do all those sort of womanly functions, not go flying, not go swimming, would you believe, not go camping. In other words, Agnes took on all these unladylike activities of the time. She was quite a tomboy, she really was. A remarkable person. Do you know, the day war broke out, she marched up to the British War Office, and now she's in her 70s at this stage, probably a little old, about middle 70s. She walked up to the British War Office and she said, knocked on the counter, and she said, "Young man, we're going to have a war, I believe. You're going to have a lot of young men coming up here volunteering to go and do their service somewhere. Now, most of them will not know how to shoot, so I'll teach them to shoot." Now here you've got a middle-aged 70-year-old, a marksman. Absolutely incredible. And when the war was finished, she heard about this new thing called, this new flying contraption called a helicopter. She's now in her 80s, and she decides she's going to learn to fly a helicopter. This was the person who gave us guiding, would you believe? But I should also add that my grandmother, who was by this time married to BP, came on the scene, a very much younger woman, a woman of enormous capacity, of enormous energy. And if it wasn't for her foresight, if it wasn't for Agnes's foresight in the rights of women to a fair go, as we say in Australia, I don't know that the Girl Guide movement would have ever got off the ground. But it did. It not only got off the ground, but it is now flourishing. And it takes people like you to continue on with the good work and worthwhile efforts. I think, if I may just leave you all with this one message. BP had a dream, and the dream was there was no future in this warlike stuff. What we need is world peace. And if we're going to get world peace, what better way of presenting or obtaining world peace than through the youth of the world? Hence, the Scouts jamborees, world jamborees every 4 years. What does that do? It brings members of the Scouting movement, and indeed, I'm happy to say, guiding movement, together every 4 years from all parts of the world. And what do? They do badge swapping, they're talking, they're communicating, one person to another. That's what we're about at the end of the day. And my belief is that this is our future. As long as men love women, and we continue to have children, that is our insurance policy for the future. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming.